I went into first grade at Cathedral Parish School, which was the first time I think I ever knew that there were Sisters of St. Joseph. I was new to all of this stuff with sisters in habits that went from head to toe, and all you saw was their face. But it didn't take long for you to learn that they had your best interest in mind. They communicated with you through their eyes. You could look into their eyes and you saw into their heart. You saw what they were doing themselves. They were doing it for love of God. They're doing it for love of His church.
They have been there through the years, through the decades, through the centuries, not letting the right hand know what the left was doing.
Was there tough love at times? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we've told the stories before that if you ever got in trouble at school, you were in worse trouble with the nuns than you ever were with your parents, but you knew you were still going to get in trouble when you got home because you made sister mad. The impact that they have on lives is truly an amazing story, but it's a story that is filled with grace. And grace is not something we see a lot in our world, and especially in America today. And that's why the future to me still is exciting for them and for the people whose lives have been touched by them.
When you talk about the service or the dedication of nuns, this is truly one that put them to the test.
Conditions in France during the 16th and 17th centuries were not too different in essence from the human condition today. People questioned spiritual values, greed, materialism, political unrest, and social injustice. The first Sisters of St. Joseph answered the call to serve in these conditions. In 1866, immediately following the Civil War, 8 religious women journeyed to Florida and Georgia from Le Puy, France. They came simply to educate the children of liberated slaves. They were not rich, nor did they have any European biases to prejudice them. They had the flexibility to serve the needs of the church both in France and in America. This enabled them to work side by side with the people who needed them the most, and it freed them to minister in the 19th century Catholic Church, which was dominated by a male hierarchy. Wars of religion had begun in France as early as 1562. Religion was suppressed as part of efforts to separate the French Church from Rome. Early efforts included requiring priests to swear allegiance to a secular constitution. Then, pressure was put on the religious to participate in clandestine activities such as Holy Mass conducted by politicized priests. And although some religious succumbed, most refused and held to their convictions, dying rather than denying their faith. Prior to the French Revolution, there were perhaps 200 communities of Sisters of St. Joseph. Now they felt it necessary to abandon their convents, disperse, and return to their individual family homes where possible. The state disposed of the sisters' property and even expelled them from their common house. The orphanage became a prison. The sisters were tested, and for non-compliance, condemned for treason. In fact, most of the Sisters of St. Joseph were imprisoned, and of those, some were executed for harboring recalcitrant priests. And on June 17, 1794, in Monterey Square, the heart of Le Puy, 2 sisters were guillotined. During the Revolution, the congregation seemingly disappeared, but it was only dormant. But as long as the ordeal of the revolution succumbed to exhaustion, the sisters began to reassemble. Why did these women dedicate themselves to this way of life, this mission to serve the dear neighbor? The price members had to pay in this cause required them to renounce worldly pleasures and to live the vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. This enabled them to live a strict moral code while at the same time accepting second-class status, for they were not cloistered in the church they loved and served. In the second half of the 19th century, waves of missionaries from European congregations depart for the Western Hemisphere. The Sisters of St. Joseph were already prepared for their next journey. All that was needed was an invitation. In 2016, 150 years later, the Sisters of St. Joseph continue to creatively and faithfully serve the dear neighbor. Immersed in a modern culture, yet distinctively present in the service of God, these ingenious, determined sisters show no sign of stopping.
Our founder's first idea was he would name us after the hidden saint, St. Joseph. We know very little about St. Joseph. He is, in the Gospels, the saint who was hidden but served. When we finally were allowed to be a congregation, it was one of the very first apostolic or sent orders that were sent out into the community to actually do the corporal works of mercy. The genius of our founder, I think, is he said that we were gathered together to do anything of which a woman is capable. Which is a dangerous statement when you think about it, but since he was a Jesuit, it makes sense. And so that's what we do. We do anything of which a woman is capable. So we have never been strictly in one type of ministry. We've looked at what the church is needing, what the church is calling us to, and gone out and done whatever it was. We are certainly women of the church, women of faith, but not limited by too much.
In 2005, Bishop Victor Gallion designated the diocesan records dating from 1594 to 1905 as the official historical archives of the Diocese of St. Augustine. The 1565 committee was formed to assist the diocese in preserving the records of the archives and to establish a major center for the study of Christianity in North America. The Sisters of St. Joseph have made a significant contribution to the conservation project. The congregation has provided a building where their own archives have been kept to house the historical archives of the diocese. The two-story building was completely renovated to provide a fireproof and flood-proof vault to house the historically rich documents.
The bishop that called us here went to school to the Sisters of St. Joseph in Le Puy. He was born in Le Puy. So he knew the sisters well, and I guess he knew that he would get a group that would really work hard with the black people, particularly the ones that he wanted us to work with. And we did that.
I have 500,000 to 600,000 blacks without education, without religion, and without baptism for whom I wish to do something. It is my wish that you understand clearly and perfectly that it is for the care of the Negroes and for them only that I am seeking sisters of your order for my diocese.
It was really on-the-job training, because not only did they have to run a school and all, but they had to learn English as well. You know, the people they were teaching did not speak French. So I can just imagine the conditions that were like when they came here. You know, primitive living conditions for them. A certain amount of bigotry aimed at them. In the early letters you see, you know, that some of the white people here just hate the black people, and by extension those of us who try to help them.
laissant derrière elles leur pays natal pour s'établir avec des gens qui ne parlaient pas.
Miss Mary conducts the class of the older ones. Sister Selene and I conduct the younger ones. How pleased I am to see that I am understood by these children. I teach them catechism and give them the lesson in sacred history and arithmetic. This morning during catechism, one of them made a sign to be permitted to ask me something. After obtaining permission, he said, "Sister, tell me please, if I confess myself, and if I say all my sins to the priest, you think God will forgive me? I am very much afraid to go to hell. I have made more than one sin."
When I found the letters, and I could read some of them, but not thoroughly, so the woman who helped us was very gracious and came every day and worked on the letters for us. And that's how, I really put that together. And the idea to write the book was the General Superior's idea, who said she thinks I should write the story, since I was always talking about these letters and the things that I had found in the archives. So she probably wanted me to stop talking about it and do something with it. So she asked me to write the book, so that's how I got to do the book.
Dear good and excellent Mother, I would like to profit by the occasion of our sisters' writing to put a note in their letters. I am still very busy with English, which begins to enter into my poor head a bit. I no longer have as much trouble making myself understood to the children, and I can explain the most essential things from the catechism to them, things of which they are completely ignorant, even the oldest, who made their first communion several years ago. There usually are from 20 to 30 children. I have names for about 40, but they do not come regularly. I have no trouble with them, they are quite good. Of this number, nearly half of them are Protestants. Oh, how happy we would be if we could convert some of them. Please, my beloved Mother, pray and have prayers said for this intention.
There are over 100 letters that we have, but I tried to choose ones that would tell the most about what the sisters were doing at that time and how the congregation grew and the kinds of things that we did, how we took care of a lot of people. That's why we have a lot of friends, I think. We were very kind to everybody. They didn't have to be black or white. They had no color for us or religion either.
By 1916, the sisters had been teaching blacks of all faiths throughout Florida for 50 years. Then, Florida's governor declared that it was against the law for white teachers to teach blacks, and he, therefore, arrested the three sisters at St. Benedict's School.
Their dedication and what they did, and then going to jail for teaching African American kids, in many ways there's a bravery and a steadiness about it that I think leaves its imprint everywhere.
This law was finally declared null, and the sisters continued teaching until 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was passed.
The beginning of a person's life is what matters a lot, because what you learn when you're a child, it sticks with you even when you get older. You remember. And I have pleasant memories of the sisters, because when I was going to St. Benedict, to have the sisters of St. Joseph was a blessing for us, because we didn't have anybody else to teach us. The sisters would sit all the children in the front of the church. We sat on the front rows and sisters sat behind us. And if anybody said anything or did anything, you get your ear pulled. Because she used to pull our ears to make us behave. And then after Mass, they kept us in to teach us our religion.
I graduated in 1938. We paid 10 cents a week to the nuns. And Mother would wrap up the little 10 cents in a little newspaper. And sometimes she used to wait table, and if she made good tips, then she'd do an extra dime for some other kid that was not paying. And Sister would take it and pay for some of the kids, because they didn't turn them away, I don't think. They just let them come, whether they had the 10 cents or not.
During my school days, and my friend Louise Price, she was Catholic, and she was in, "Boy, the sisters don't take no mess off you." tight, tough, but just good discipline and good teachers. And it showed in the action of the students that attended schools.
So it was a blessing to have them in the community because they used to visit the sick. And, you know, it's a lot of things. They were active in the community. They were very visible. Even, you know, this time when I was little, the sisters wore habits. They didn't wear street clothes. And everybody recognized the nuns because of their habits. See, they had their habits on and they were always immaculate. To us, that was a badge of authority.
And they would run and play ball with us, and I was hoping the habits would fall off so I could see the hair, because it was rumored that the nuns had to cut the hair off. They didn't say short, they said off. And I wanted to see what a nun looked like with no hair. But they played and no nuns, no habits fell off. The nuns would instill in you that you need to do something for somebody, help somebody, make a difference in their lives. As the nuns have made a difference in so many lives. And they would love for you to just pass that on.
The sisters to me are great people. When I think about it, a young woman give her life to God. That is what that is to me. And I think that's why I hold them in high esteem.
My mother always told you mind, sister, and you be good for sister, and things like this, because they know children are mischievous. But they were never mean to us, but they made us behave. And you know, this is the child's beginning is what he does all through life. So they were just teaching us how to become good men and women.
I learned a lot from the nuns and learned to give back.
We came from the original foundation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, where they were founded. All the other St. Josephs in the United States just about came from Lyon, and that was a refoundation after the French Revolution, and that's where they came from. From the big city are much more sophisticated. From Le Puy, we are peasants. We're different. We really are.
It's been said that when Jesus addressed the crowds that followed him, he didn't recite great truths of the Talmud. Rather, he spoke with a candid and heartfelt style of a storyteller. The Sisters of St. Joseph understand the importance and power of preserving church history as well as personal history. Using their faith stories, they point others to the ultimate storyteller and teacher whose own life is the greatest story ever told.
Well, Jesus spoke in parables, and so the parable and the story is the easiest way to communicate a truth that is sometimes lost in abstractions. Catholic faith is not about an idea, it's not a philosophy, it's not an ideology, it's an encounter.
I was first introduced to sisters, not the Sisters of St. Joseph, when I was 6 years old and entered first grade. And I was very enamored by sisters, and I loved my first grade teacher. And I remember very clearly one day coming home and telling my mom, as she was cooking dinner, "Mom, I'm going to be a nun." And she kind of looks down at me and says, "Oh, you know, honey, when I was a little girl like you, I wanted to be a nun too. But you'll grow out of that."
Oh, I was a wild girl. I liked to play cowboys and Indians, and we played a lot of sports. We had a good neighborhood of children, so we always had something going. When I was in third grade, I had Sister Boniface for my teacher. I thought she was very old at the time, but she was probably in her 50s. But she just influenced me greatly by her kindness, her goodness, the way she watched out for the children. And I wanted to be just like her.
Well, I always knew I wanted to do one of two things. I either wanted to be the first woman to play Major League Baseball, which, as you can see, I didn't make that, or I wanted to be a sister.
It wasn't until after I was out of college that I started thinking about religious life and felt that call, and began to look into different congregations to serve, and couldn't find any that wanted an architect.
My parents tell me that I was talking at 9 months, and as my mother would add, and hasn't stopped since.
As I was a kid growing up, I was the oldest. I have a younger brother 2 years younger and a sister 6 years younger. So when my dad worked on the car, he needed a helper. And my mother would say, honey, you better go out and help Dad.
I knew very, very early on that I wanted to be a teacher. And very early on, too, that I wanted to be a sister. It was in the first grade.
Wasn't quite as bright as my sister, who skipped a grade in her young years. But I went to Catholic school for 4th grade through 12th grade, graduated from Bishop Kenny High School.
My mom used to have these cloth diapers. In those days, they didn't have your disposables. They had the cloth diapers. Well, Joyce and I discovered those diapers, and we would take a rope and tie it around our waist, tuck one diaper in the front, tuck one diaper in the back to make a long dress, and then we put a diaper on our head to be our veil. So we played nuns from about 4 years old on. And every year, we would ask Santa Claus for a doll for Christmas, not to play house like other little girls did. Our dolls would be propped up in our doll table and chairs, and they would be our students, and we dressed as nuns would be teaching them.
My classmates, who knew, of course, because I didn't make it a secret. Well, this was St. Augustine. Everybody knew everybody in those days. They were very supportive of my decision, very supportive. They still are. They're really excited about coming for my 50th Jubilee. But, I dated, I went to dances, I did everything, hung out at Russell's Barbecue. I did everything that a normal teenager would do. And then I entered the convent.
I grew up in Dublin, Ireland. I happened to be very special because I was born premature, 2 months premature. And my mother didn't tell me this until after I was professed nun, that when I was born, there was a sister there helping to deliver me, and she told my mother that I would be a nun one of these days.
Well, it just so happens the only other girl in the neighborhood that I hung around with was a definite tomboy, and she tested climbing trees, so in order to keep her as a friend, I had to climb trees. At that time, James Dean's movie was out, Rebel Without a Cause. So we decided that we would have our gang names. She would be one and I would be another. And we would also race on our bicycles. And the unfortunate thing is, we were playing chicken. The one thing we forgot to decide was when we chickened out, which side we would go. We both chickened out the same way.
On the way home from church, we would see the sisters walking, and we'd always want to, Mom, stop, Mom, stop. And my mother has 5 kids in the car. My dad wasn't Catholic, so he wasn't with us. But she said, there's no room. We said, yes, there is. We'll all get in the back. They can. So we'd stop and we'd ask them. And most of the time they'd say, we really like to walk, because it was like maybe 6 or 7 blocks. But once in a while they'd say, all right, we'll go with you. And they'd climb in. And it was a highlight of the week for all of us. The sisters got in our car and went for a ride with us.
I grew up in New York. I was born in New York, in Queens County. I went to kindergarten for 2 years, because I guess I was a problem. They kept me an extra year in kindergarten. I was probably 4 when I started kindergarten. I went to Catholic grade school, and I went to Catholic high school. I went to Our Lady of Wisdom Academy in New York for 2 years. Then I transferred here to St. Augustine when I was in the 10th grade. And I graduated here in 1944, entered the convent shortly after that, and I've been here ever since. I had an older brother, a year older than I was. His name was Thomas Joseph. When he was 5, he had an appendectomy. He died as a result of that. So that's how I got his name. I asked for his name, like I was just a year younger than he was. My calling probably was confirmed at my mother's funeral. When my mother died, I can remember walking behind the coffin. I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and it hit me very hard then that I was called to religious life.
When we look at the challenges we have today, or the challenges we've had over the last 150 years, they were no greater than that first challenge of having these tens of thousands of freed slaves come to a country of which you know nothing, that speaks a language that you don't know, and has a climate you've never experienced, and come and educate. Now, our congregation comes from a charism that says, discover what's needed and go figure out how to do it. And basically, the dear neighbor is the focus, but it's not just service to the dear neighbor. It's drawing the dear neighbor closer to the person of Jesus. And in doing so, reconciling the dear neighbor with another dear neighbor, with their God, and ourselves with our God. So that element of reconciliation underlies everything that we do. An element of reconciliation acknowledges that we're all sinners and that we all have room to change, to convert, to be drawn closer to God. So as the sisters came to Florida to teach the freed slaves, we still have sisters who are committed to working with those who are in slavery, if you will, or have been enslaved in a variety of ways. We also have sisters who are still working with the Black community. Right here in Miami, our sisters do marvelous works with our Haitian community.
We have been here at St. James Catholic School for 17 years. I've been here for 16 years. I've been the principal for 7 years. They face many challenges on a daily basis. I have a student who lives in a homeless shelter right now. But we welcome them here every morning to try and help them to grow in their faith, in their academics, to help them live strong, productive, faith-filled lives. That's what we do here. The mission of our school is to provide a quality education in a gospel-centered atmosphere.
I respectfully disagree what he says because the wind erosion has rocks, sand, and dust or dirt, and you never know when it might go to people's eyes. Wow. I respectfully disagree because they can use these kind of sharp boots where we used to climb the mountains to just walk so the wind won't hurt us.
Our school was ready to close when we came. And we worked tirelessly or tiringly, I don't know, for the last 17 years to bring it to where it is today. We're a well-known school in the Diocese of Miami for what we do here. Our children are happy, our families are happy, our children do well. We've grown. We are full.
I have ministered in the Haitian community for a number of years, for the past 18 here at St. James. And then recently, the sisters have been invited to help bring leadership and our spirituality to a neighboring school, that I call it our Dear Neighbor School, Holy Family, to try and do some turnaround that we were able to do here.
It's always a very daunting task. Every morning when I look out at the 400 children in the school and say, wow, and I thank the parents for the trust they place in us to educate their children, and that is an awesome responsibility. We hold all of these lives in our hands every day, and we couldn't do it without the hand of God holding all of it. We pray the guardian angel prayer every morning to protect us and take care of us and for God to be with us, because without God, we can do nothing.
This has been the best experience of my life. I really wouldn't want to leave St. James. I mean, I've been here since I was really little, and I would like to stay here. If they had a high school, I would go.
We're not known as just people. We're known as family. When I come to school, this is like a second home for me.
The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again.
When I was very little, we never ever went to bed without saying our prayers at night. And it's interesting because we always said a Hail Mary, and then my mother had added this one little piece to the prayer. It was, sweet Jesus, let my heart be your home. Guardian angel in heaven so bright, make us be good children and always do what's right. I guess when you grow up with a family of 13, my mom would make sure that we behaved. I always shock the children here when I say, you know what, I have a secret. When I was a little girl, I didn't like to pray. But before we went to bed at night, we had to say this, "Sweet Jesus, let my heart be your home." And then God bless Mom and Dad. And then name my brothers and sisters. So it's God bless Mom and Dad, Maureen and Michael, Tommy and Joel, Debbie, Kevin, Sheila, Kathy, Angela, Beth, Monica, Burnett, and Charlie. But because I didn't like to pray too much, I would say, God bless Mom and Dad, Maureen, Michael, Tommy, Joel, Debbie, Kevin, Sheila, Kathy, Angela, Beth, Monica, Burnett, and Charlie, and hop into bed. But my mother never let us go to bed without praying. Now, how does that relate to maybe a call to religious life? I often say that those words, "Sweet Jesus, let my heart be your home," formed me, probably formed my brothers and sisters who didn't become nuns or priests, but has been a very, very big part of my life. And for me, the attraction to consecrated life was that sweet Jesus is in my heart and I am in his heart, and that the way of life of attracting me to religious life was a real fit for me.
The ministry to the wealthy is more difficult than the ministry to the poor, because the wealthy don't think they need you, and they need you more than the poor do. Whenever Sister Florence interviewed and came down and we talked, she was not interested in the work here because the parish was wealthy and she didn't think she had a place there. Finally, Sister Florence said that it got to her conscience when I told her that the very wealthy are barely spiritually poor and need you more than the poor, because they don't think they need anything in their life, and you're a servant, but we have to show them, how important it is to be part of the church. And she said that bothered her. She couldn't sleep. So she called me and says, "I'll come down and try." I said, "Fine, you'll do great." The parish is a very difficult parish because you cannot visit. You cannot do a census. You have to call them, and you can't even get their phone numbers. And they won't tell you if there's somebody sick at home. They're very private, very, very private. She has to find out through people, and then she goes and visits, and then she gets into the homes. So when she came, she was, for the first 3 months, she told me she was lost. And I said, "Sister, there's no pressure, just stay here. That's what I want you to do, and then get used to the parish." Now she's on fire. She visits the sick regularly. She has a close relationship with some that are very handicapped. She's good with them. She runs our Eucharistic ministers and our lectors, and she substitutes at every Mass when she needs to, and she's always there. Sisters sometimes are remote from people and they keep their privacy. Well, she goes to all the parties and all the events, and I know it sometimes it's drudgery when you have to complain, "Oh, we got to go back to the breakers again." But we have lots of clubs, and when the people have parties or meetings and something with the church, they always want to go to a club, and it gets very tiring. The biggest virtue that Sister has is that she's there. And she changes people quietly. I wouldn't have the patience to do it.
During the years of rapid expansion in the developing Church of Florida, and with the support of Archbishop Joseph P. Hurley, the majority of the sisters gave their time to education, which included instruction of students who were deaf, blind, developmentally disabled, or otherwise handicapped. Gradually, they became more involved in the multifaceted aspects of healthcare, and they assumed work with the aging, unwed mothers, and migrants. In the 1950s, the congregation also opened schools in Puerto Rico. And these sisters accomplished all of this because it was, and still is, the work of which a woman is capable, for the better of their dear neighbor.
The role of the Sisters of St. Joseph in the church in Florida is remarkable. The growth in the church in Florida can be marked by the movement of the sisters from one mission to the next, to begin, to establish, and then in some cases to hand off to somebody else. Part of the maxims of perfection of our own religious congregation is to advance good works until they're near perfection and hand them to someone else to take them on to whatever the next level is, and in many cases, to get the credit for it. Because in many cases, the Sisters of St. Joseph started things and moved away, and many people forgot what they had done. Many people remembered, but many forgot.
In the beginning, it was a struggle to run the hospital, you can imagine, because it was through donations that we were able to erect the hospital, and salaries were very hard to pay.
I worked in supervisory for a few years, and then I worked in every department except psychiatry. My longest time there was in the emergency room, which I like very much.
I know many times when there were people in need who could not go to a doctor's office, but the sisters would welcome them in because they were so available. Whether it was weekend, whether it was at night, they were there.
We had about 5 to 7 nuns who had been trained as registered nurses, and so they began the ministry of Mercy Hospital. They actually lived in the hospital. The early 6 sisters or 8 sisters that we had, they actually lived on the 6th floor of the hospital, and one of the wards there had been converted into a convent, so they had a little chapel up in their own space, as well as the beautiful chapel of Mercy Hospital.
Well, we are standing in this beautiful chapel that holds about 150 people, and it's one of the largest chapels that I've been in a hospital. In 1950, the sisters felt that this was where they should start to build a foundation that centers on the spirituality, the charism of the sisters, the spirit of the sisters, and of course, where they would come and pray and receive that gift that would allow them to continue to minister. As we look at the acquisition by HCA, we see that there was a lot of prayer and a lot of intention around ensuring that we continue the legacy of the Sisters of St. Joseph, as well as the mission of being a healing ministry to all that come here. And that's what the Sisters of St. Joseph are all about. We can see behind me that there's a big mural which was done by an Italian artist where the sisters meditated and prayed over that parable over and over. And when I do orientation to Mercy Hospital for new employees, for physicians, I always refer back to that gospel, to that parable that says, love your neighbor as yourself. When we think of the parable of Luke from the Good Shepherd, we see towards the end of the story that Jesus asks, why did the Good Samaritan help the man that was dying? And he said, because he had mercy on him. So Mercy Hospital received its name from the parable of the Good Samaritan found in the Gospel of Luke. When we speak of the legacy of the Sisters of St. Joseph and the healing ministry of Jesus, I think the goal that we would love to continue to live on and carry on is that we are all here for a purpose, that we're here to love thy neighbor, that we're here to pass on this ministry to others, and that everyone that comes here is treated with respect and dignity.
Some of us do work that maybe isn't as visible. I work with and do the accounting for a grant program that comes out of a wonderful foundation here in Florida that is collaborating with the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in a project in Haiti. And I now am writing reports, actually finishing them right here on my desk, writing reports with $3 million that foundation has provided in preparation for the application for the next $1 million. And managing that is rebuilding schools, parishes, and convents in Haiti that were crushed during the earthquake in 2010. 5 years later, we're still working on this, and we're going to be probably several years yet. So I don't look like I'm working with the Haitians, but I am. And so there are many ways to serve God's people.
I work in inner city school now, and our students see and hear things that probably in my lifetime I've never seen and heard, and so we have to have a way of pulling on our faith to work with those children and
help them get through some of those things.
One of the things I always tell people is that when I go to work on a project, and I've worked on maybe 35 churches now and several other projects, I've worked for 4 or 5 different architects getting my apprenticeship taken care of, and I always tell them I feel sorry for the construction people when they hear, first of all, they're going to have a woman coming out to work with them, and then they hear it's a nun. And I'm sure their first thought is, what in the world could she possibly know? So there's always that little period of getting adjusted, and after that, after the first crisis that we get through together, it's usually gone, so we're fine.
I think what's the most inspiring for me is to see now grandchildren of students I taught, and how much they've done, and how much the faith they've kept, and all that they've done, and they'll come back and tell you stories of things you did, but it made an impact on them, and that's that to me is the crowning joy.
I feel blessed that God chose me and has led me down the path that He did. I hope that I've cooperated with His graces.
I'm the very proud tutor of a young man who came to me in the 6th grade on academic probation. And this June 1st, as a 7th grader, he made an A on his final exam in English.
We went out to repair broken windows, but we spent most of our time repairing broken hearts. The emphasis of us being out there was to help seal up the churches, to stop the looting, and to provide places, get the churches open, so that people would have a place to go. And that was all they had to rely on after Katrina. Everything else was totally gone for miles, hundreds of miles. So they came to the churches. So our emphasis was that when we were working on windows and closing up the churches and doing repairs, that if anybody came, our primary focus was to stop and to spend whatever time necessary with them.
My morning prayer is, when I get out of bed, before I just put my feet on the ground, is, Lord, help me not get in your way of what you want to do in and through and with me today. And at night, when I come to nighttime, it's how did we do today, not how did I do.
Some visitors were coming to the school, and everybody was supposed to have everything just right and going on. All the children were supposed to be doing a certain thing. And this one little kid kept pulling on my leg, on my skirt. I said, you gotta sit down, we gotta get started. He said, and he just wouldn't. I said, what is your problem today? And he says, when I go home this afternoon, I have to decide whether I'm gonna go live with my mom or my dad. Now this kid was in 4th grade. Still, years later, I think about that little guy, and our kids are making those kind of decisions, and they shouldn't have to be making those kind of decisions. Am I going to be loyal to mom, or am I going to be loyal to dad? Or, we shouldn't be asking our children to do those things, and we are. Society is asking it.
I went into 1st grade at Cathedral Parish School. My 1st grade teacher was Sister Mary Virginia. That Christmas, she had us do an art project where we colored the figures of Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus that ended up becoming a manger scene. And it was one of those things that every year at Christmas, it came out. And even as I grew older, and my mom was like, do you really want to put this up again? Yes, if you're not going to put it up out in the family room, the living room, it went on my dresser in my bedroom. And despite the fact that it was all paper and cardboard, I still have that manger scene.
I'd say initially there was a little bit of awe with You know, these women that were wearing the full black habits. I was in a school environment, so it could be very disciplinary. Part of it was that there was a transition going on. This would have been 1966. So there were younger women becoming nuns, and then older women who had been nuns for a very long time.
Strict in a funny kind of way. Strict, you know, kind of slapped you in the back of the head, Mr. Webb.
I think part of the experience that I had was that there was a transition that was going on, so that some of the women were very old school and very disciplinary.
Please do as you're told, Mr. Webb.
Where at the same time, there were several younger nuns who were very much engaged to be involved with all of us kids.
Please return to your seat, Mr. Webb.
And I was a little kid. Back then I would have been 6, 7, 8 years old, and you know, they would have been involved with playing kickball with us. They would have been involved with trying to incorporate their lives with us, not as a disciplinary type of person, but as a friend.
Basically, you know, hey, Mr. Webb, straighten up, I know your grandmother.
One of the big themes of spirituality is that we are in a war between, I don't want to be too dramatic, good and evil, but there is truth to that. And our society tries to make it sound like it's all the same. It's a choice between apples and apricots, but it's not. They're choices that form me in ways that are life-giving or death-dealing. I was not promoted by George Lucas or anything like that. But what I saw one of my early years of education was that the theology that we were asked to teach and the students' lives, they weren't connecting. And the missionaries of old listened to the culture and then brought Christ into the culture. And then the people could make connection, and that's what I did. It took me a long time, but when I saw Star Wars, I got it, what George Lucas was up to. For a long time, I poo-pooed it. The students wanted me to see it, and that was another invitation from Christ, because you see, the cultural venue to make the connection is the invitation of the people. So how is God indirectly preparing this generation to hear the word? Too many times we think when you read a book in theology, the connection is made, when in fact in Scripture it's always made through the gut. It's through life experience. I want to make sure you understand, as far as George Lucas is concerned, he's trying to bring the book back. When he keeps talking about the book, it's the Bible. If you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you'd say to the mountain it would move, or the tree, or the X-wing. He goes that way because that's what Scripture is, a lot. To transcend ourselves by the grace of God. If I try to transcend myself, I could become an Adolf Hitler or something lovely like that. Not just a noble person. I could become a noble person. We do have those examples, but so many things can come to play. But God's grace can go through all of that. We have a hard time believing that God acts. We use God language, but many times we get the idea that I do it. You do it, that you're doing it right now. But in actuality, God works through us, and we need to be in touch with that through prayer. That's the part today in our secular society which can be just as dangerous as a communist totalitarian belief system, because we don't believe God acts. And that's kind of a scary thing. I don't mean when I say we, I mean our culture. Where was God? Even when I was in high school, where was God at Auschwitz? Where was God at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? God gives us free will, and we have to live with that consequence. You can't say, all right, the human race is about to do something really pretty terrible, therefore we'll remove that. That's the scary part. Instead of facing ourselves, we blame God. Isn't that interesting? But it's true. Where was God? Well, where were we?
Dear sister, in Florida, we have 6 communities. We would have more had we subjects enough to send, but the vocations here are very scarce. Dear sister, if you know of some young persons liking the South and being called to the religious life, please send them to us. Though according to our holy rule, the bishop of the diocese is our first superior, yet Bishop Moore wishes, as did Bishop Verreau, that the bond of union between Florida and Le Puy should not be broken. We, therefore, belong to Le Puy.
I am regretting the past and fearing the future. Suddenly my Lord was speaking. My name is I Am. He paused. He waited. He continued. When you live in the past, with its mistakes and regrets, it is hard. I am not there. My name is not I was. When you live in the future, with its problems and fears, it is hard. I am not there. My name is not I will be. When you live in this moment, it is not hard. I am here. My name is I Am.
So much of Florida, is sand with a recent addition of something on top of it, and no roots holding it down, no roots of the history of the community. There was no community there 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's been created in our times. And here is one that really does have deep roots. I mean, when the sisters came here, they were a new phenomenon, but the church had really deep roots here, and St. Augustine had really deep roots here. So it's, they are, the new people of 1866 who came here, but they have continued on those older roots, and they have put out roots themselves, I think, particularly in the teaching aspect of, running a school, because by the nature of it, you take very young people and they hopefully live to be very old people, and that continues your influence for a long time.
I consider myself a pretty conservative person, but when it comes to social obligations with regards to fiscal policy and protection of innocent human life from conception to natural death, that implicates a lot of social justice concepts and issues that are brought to bear in my day-to-day professional existence that would not have been there, that social consciousness would not have been there but for the influence of religious in my life. That's their legacy, and that's a great gift from them to me and to others who have been equally as powerfully influenced.
I think for the future, we look to God's providence. We invite women to be challenged by this charism, to be available to the service of the church. If you'd asked me 15 years ago if I was going to sit in this kind of a role, I would have thought you were really losing it, because I would not have dreamed of moving from what I had done in healthcare administration or even in educational work to this kind of a role. And yet it's almost a natural progression. But it was a response in trusting God's providence that it was His call. It was a response to the needs of the church to do so.
It's kind of like the image of the trapeze artist. And he's got his hand on one bar and reaching out to the other until she lets go of this bar of what was to leap into the future and grab what is next. And that the time that's being described that we're in now is between those two bars, which can be scary, which can be exciting, and it's total reliance on God.
The long-term legacy that this particular congregation can have here in Florida, and well as hopefully God please beyond, can still be a marvelous, marvelous story to tell in the years to come.
Looking at the future, I think my greatest hope is that we are open to what the Holy Spirit wants and will go where the Holy Spirit leads. There will always be a need for consecrated religious life, and I just hope that we're open and have a good listening ear, and that we continue doing anything of which a woman is capable.
I just believe religious life is what the Navy used to say. It's not just a job, it's an adventure. It has been an adventure.
Visit the sisters online as the stories continue at ssjfl.org. See additional unedited interviews and oral histories in the Digital Archives collection of the Sisters of St. Joseph of St. Augustine, Florida. Just look for the button labeled Sisters Video Archive. For the DVD of this program or a copy of the book Beyond the Call, log on to ssjfl.org or call 904-358-6390 and thank you. With heartfelt thanks, the Sisters of St. Joseph gratefully acknowledge the following funders for their generous support of this documentary.